On today's show, we've talked a lot about trades for the Cavs, but what if they just stand pat? Spencer German's here. We're going to talk about that on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. Joined today by Spencer German of Cleveland Cavaliers on SI, and maybe you know him from the Locked On Shador Sanders podcast over if you're a Browns fan that you listen to that. But Spencer's here. We're going to talk a lot about what maybe the Cavs could not do, or maybe they will do. We'll dive into all of it. But before we get started, thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching on YouTube as we get started, hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest from us here at Locked On Cavs, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, because right now new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Spencer, I have gone on record several times on this podcast, on radio shows at 92.3 The Fan, where we both work, in a lot of different areas. I've talked about how I think the Cavs need to make some changes this offseason. I think that the roster, they should not run it back. But the thing that I probably haven't spent time talking about is, well, what if they do run it back? And I don't know where you come out yet on whether or not they should or shouldn't, who they should trade or who they shouldn't trade. But kind of where I want to start today is, if this group decides to run it back again, which I don't think is some crazy thing to think could happen, what does it look like?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. I do tend to fall into, I know we'll talk more about like what this looks like. I tend to fall into the same bucket as you, where I think changes need to be made. I think you've tried with this core for 3 straight years and you come up short 3 straight years. So you need to change something up. I'm not saying like blow it all up, but I think there are some ancillary changes that need to happen. But what's interesting, like you asked this question, and I was talking about this a couple weeks ago. Like, if you think about the landscape of the Eastern Conference right now, you have the Bucks with Giannis, who may or may not be coming back. It sounds like he is open to being traded, and he may go to the West. He might end up in the Western Conference in some capacity. You have a Sixers team that it seems like their window has basically like closed because Joel Embiid can't stay healthy. We have no idea what that team's going to look like. They were awful this year without him. So what does the future hold for them? And then you have a Celtics team that is going to be in a little bit of a transition. They're not going to have Jason Tatum next year. So that maybe opens up this window where everyone thought the Celtics were going to run the East for like, you know, the next 5 years. And now all of a sudden maybe it was just a 1-year thing. And they're like the Cavs, you know, sort of financially strapped right now. Like they can only do so much. Are they going to just run it back with the same group and keep paying these high tax bills, especially because they just got a new owner as well? So understanding like the landscape of the East, I think is key here, because on one hand, somebody like Kobe Altman could look and say, well, hey, the East is going to be weaker. At least we feel like it's going to be. We feel like we're right in the thick of things in this conference already. If a few things go differently, if a few balls bounce differently, if injuries, right, don't impact that series against the Pacers, maybe we're still playing. And if that's kind of the thought process, like there's certainly a case to be made as to why you would just keep it the same and say, hey, let's go back out and see like if luck, because luck is a factor this time of year. We know that. Like, let's see if luck impacts, like goes in our favor next year. And that allows us to, you know, go deeper into the playoffs. Now, there's an opposite side of this, which is in the same vein, like that's also maybe because the East is going to be more wide open. That's a reason to make a move, right? Like push the chips in the center of the table, go for it while you feel like there's an opportunity to make a run here. But it's less about what we think, obviously, and more about what Kobe Altman thinks and how he approaches that question. I think is going to be fascinating.
Right. And I did spend yesterday's show, at least the start of it, because over at The Ringer, Zach Lowe talked about this on one of his podcasts, and I found it to be very interesting. But he went 1 through 15. Which Eastern Conference team would you most want to be for the next 5 years? And he had the Cavs at number 1. And it's hard for me to disagree with that. Like, despite the fact that they came up as short as they did in the postseason this year, which nobody expected, we all expected them to, at the very least, make the conference finals as opposed to losing in the conference semifinals in 5 games. But that doesn't mean that their future's not bright. Now, whether or not that involves them making a trade or not making a trade, I do think the state of the rest of the Eastern Conference matters a little bit in this conversation, because you look up and down the East, you bring up Milwaukee. If Giannis is there, like, the Bucks are going to win 40 games next year, and they're not going to be a threat in the playoffs because Damian Lillard's not going to play after tearing his Achilles, and the rest of that roster stinks.
Yeah.
Indiana, I think, pretty good. How long is that team going to be together for a franchise that historically does not pay the luxury tax? I don't know. Orlando, are they ever going to figure out how to score points? I don't know. Like, I like a lot of their pieces, but you start looking up and down the East. I mean, New York didn't fire their coach yesterday, 2 days ago, because they feel like they've tapped out that group. Like, you go up and down the East, and they're not teams that you would rather be than the Cavs. Like, this doesn't mean that there aren't teams that also have good situations they're in, but the Cavs are in a really good spot. And that leads me to wonder, okay, well, if they do just run it back and bank on, maybe being healthier in the postseason, or maybe not just seeing their offense collapse because they suddenly forget how to make wide open threes, is that a viable strategy?
So for me, I don't know that I can just like go into a season and be like, well, hey, if things go differently, it's all good. I think that, like, listen, I can understand from like a fan perspective. We were all fans at one point, right? Of numerous teams, different teams throughout our lives. I think, like, when you have that perspective on it, it's like, yeah, from a fan perspective, we always hold on to this, like, well, if this one thing went differently, maybe we're talking about, X, Y, Z happening, So I get why that is a take you can have. I get why that is a stance that you can have. For me, though, it's like you got to kind of create your own luck here to a degree. And that's why, again, I just think you like changing something out, trying to make the team at least a little bit better, or at least maybe try to get under the second apron where you can have a little more flexibility is something that the Cavs should prioritize, because right now this team has only shown you like their ceiling is the second round. And I also wonder, and you obviously you were there, Danny, and as was I for Kobe Altman's press conference at the end of the season. And I can 100% totally wrap my head around the idea that there is another level to Evan Mobley's game, and that there's another level to this team that's very, very young developing, right? And so when he says that, I get it, but it's also now been his reasoning for this team's shortcomings the last couple of years. Has, like, this is the third year in a row where he said that exact same thing. Hey, we're still young, we're going to develop. And my big question that I have for him is, okay, how long can that be the excuse? How long can that be the thing you fall back on of like, well, hey, if we just keep developing, we're going to get over this hump eventually? Because at some point you might not, and you're going to have to make those tough decisions. And so for me, I'm like, I think that's now. I think that time is now. But listen, like, to put a bow on this entire conversation about like standing pat, I do think there's a viable argument to be had that like they could just try to do it all again. And if they do that, like, they're still going to probably win like 50 plus games. They're still going to be one of the top teams in the East. The problem is, though, like, nobody's going to take them seriously until this time of year. Like, it's going to be about doing it on this stage in May and potentially in June and getting over that hump finally. And no one's going to buy that they've changed unless they actually change out some of these pieces and parts. Now, that's not something that necessarily they worry about, but they have to think about like what this opportunity is and how close they are, and whether or not it makes sense to pull the trigger on something like that. And I would. But I also feel like Kobe Altman seems pretty reserved to the idea that, like, if we don't end up doing anything, we do stand pat, then we're going to be just fine. And I think we can still win a title with this current construction of the roster.
So here is what I think is one of the biggest gambles of standing pat. And I don't think that, I mean, we went from last season to the season that just finished with the roster really not changing at all in the offseason. Like, the two-way guys changed, but the roster itself really didn't change. Obviously, there was the trade in the middle of the season that changed things, and there was a change on the coaching staff, bringing in Kenny Atkinson and getting rid of JB Bickerstaff, but they didn't make a change. If, like, they quote-unquote run it back, I don't think that they're going to bring back actually every player the way that they did before, just because I don't think that that's financially feasible. So maybe
Yeah.
running it back as like Jarrett Allen returns and Darius Garland returns, which I don't necessarily think. I think one of those things is more likely than the other. But I think the biggest risk in doing that is not about how good this team is going to be, but one of the talking points that immediately happened as soon as this postseason ended was about mental toughness. And how do you can that be taught? Can it be learned through experiences? And I think the answer there is probably somewhere in the middle. And I don't think that this Cavs team is just absent of any guys that are mentally tough. I think that's unfair and not true. But I also think one of the biggest gambles would be that they learned this mental toughness from this series. Because I'm also at the point, Spencer, where if this did not teach this group of guys the required postseason basketball mental toughness that they need, I don't know that anything ever will. And if you're taking the gamble that this did and you're wrong, then I think things in the future get really dicey. I think we talk about where the Cavs are at in terms of their future for the next 5 years compared to the rest of the East. And I love where things are at right now for them. I think they have an extremely bright future still. But if you make the gamble that no, that loss to the Pacers made us grow up in ways that we didn't know we needed to grow up, and now we are truly ready to win a championship, and you're correct about that, then you can stand pat. But you don't know that you're correct about that. And I think that is a very big risk to take. Yeah.
No, I think you're 100% right. And I think, to your point on you don't know, running it back and just saying, they feel that way because of what they've seen. That is, again, just banking on this idea that, luck's going to fall in your, luck's going to go your way this time of year. And I just don't know if that's, a legitimate, if you're a GM of a team, you can't just let your strategy be, well, hey, luck. That's our strategy for how we're going to approach this roster. That's not a way to really build a team. And the mental toughness thing is a great conversation. I've had it a number of times at this point, obviously, but I think along the lines of what you said, there's a degree of mental toughness that comes with when you're in the playoffs, you learn it. You learn that those games, the intensity gets turned up. You learn in a certain moment how you're going to handle yourself, what you have to do. That the end of game 2 where they're turning the ball over on inbound passes and things like that. Those are where the mental toughness piece comes into play. And hopefully they learn from those things. But I still think there's also a mentality part of it that can't be learned and is just kind of innate in people. And that's where, as we talk about, should somebody be traded? Should they make a change with maybe somebody in the core 4? That's where I think it's how do you change out some of the pieces and parts to get more of that mentality on your team and guys who have experienced that already and kind of know what it takes that time of year to get you over that hump.
Yeah, maybe they do stand pat, maybe they don't. We're going to talk about what it could look like how much room do they have to actually grow if they stand pat, plus maybe some changes we would make. It probably know mine, but you might not know Spencer. So we're going to do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs, they are in full swing, and every night, well, not every night, but most nights, some nights, I'm starting to miss basketball. It's been a long time. Back tonight, but it's been a long time since we've had a basketball game. They all deliver highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments, whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player. There's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now with FanDuel, because FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live once the game is going on with player props, performance trends, same-game parlays, you name it. Fans have more ways than ever before to play smart and win big. Maybe you think Oklahoma City is going to win the finals. I think Oklahoma City is going to win the finals. Spencer, who is not on the screen right now, I can see in the background looking at his phone because he's on FanDuel going and betting that Oklahoma City is going to win the finals because the Thunder are the best team in basketball. They've been one of the 2 best teams in basketball all year long. They are the best team left. They're going to win this series, and they're going to win this series in 5 games. If you believe that, there's money to be made on FanDuel. You can log into that FanDuel Sportsbook app or go to FanDuel.com. And if it's your first bet, Place that first $5 bet on it. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Yes, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Right now, never been a better time. Might not be a better time in the future. Right now, the perfect time. So head to FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com. Place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Make sure you drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. And Spencer, I don't think they're going to run it back. I don't think they should run it back. But if they do run it back, is this a team that can still get better?
I think so, because like I said, I do give some credence to the idea, as Kobe explained in his end of season press conference, that there is still some room to grow, and specifically for one player in particular, in Evan Mobley. And as we know, Evan is the key cog in this entire thing. Like, his ability to take another step and grow in his ability and in what he brings to the table, especially on the offensive end. Like, this was year one of him really asserting himself on the offensive end. We knew how great of a defender he was. We knew some of those plays he could make at times. But this year, he really made a point in taking on more of an offensive workload. And I think there is more to come from that. Like, I know there's been some things said about Kenny Atkinson last year. He was coaching the French team in the Olympics. And so he didn't really have a chance to unpack. He didn't really he was flying back and forth to meet with guys. He didn't really have a chance to map certain things out. And I think now that he has seen Evan in action for a year, and the results were obviously already great, I think now he can start integrating him even more into the things that they want to do on the offensive end and get him more touches and get him the ball in his hands more and see what he can do with it. And Evan, I think, proved that he's willing to take that on. That is one thing. You talk about teams being mentally tough or not mentally tough. I think Evan proved this across the entirety of the season, that he is mentally capable of handling a lot of these things, because it takes a pretty the mental fortitude it takes to basically say to yourself, I'm going to make sure that I become more of a dominant player and assert myself into situations more so that I can contribute that on that end of the floor. I think that says a lot about him. So yes, I do think if they stand pat, there is room for them to grow, but I wonder what the ceiling is on that, what the cap is on, okay, if Evan Mobley does reach that level, is that enough to get this team over that hump against a Pacers team in the second round of the playoffs, or is there more that's needed? And where else is that coming from? Donovan Mitchell is pretty established at this point. There's probably something to be said about if Darius Garland is still here. He hasn't really had a chance. If you want to talk about luck in the playoffs, he's had some of the worst luck just in terms of injuries, and he hasn't really had a chance to show it on that stage. So yes, there are a number of guys that I think can still help this team grow and move forward. But I do think there's a limit to how much more that helps the Cavs in terms of actually chasing a championship in the postseason.
And I think one of the tough parts about that is you're not going to know until next April and May. This is not something that you're going to learn. You will know if individual guys are better. You're going to know. And Evan Mobley, I'm confident in saying, is going to be a better basketball player next year than he was this year. And he was really freaking good this year. He was second team all NBA and deserved that. I think he's going to be somebody that at a certain point, maybe it's not quite next year, but in the near future is going to perennially be in the first team all NBA conversation and get votes to be on that. Maybe that's next year. Maybe it's not. You'll know he is better, but this Cavs team is going to, if they run it back, be viewed as, okay, well, we need to see it in the playoffs. And that is totally fair. And the Cavs expect that. The Cavs know that. And the Cavs, to a certain extent, think it's fair. Donovan Mitchell said as much after the playoffs matters. It is not going to, we could go 82-0, he said, and nobody's going to care. I think that's a little bit extreme. I think if they go 82-0, a lot of people are going to care. But the point still stands. So I do think that there are areas to grow, and Evan Mobley is the biggest one. And I think that he has the most room to grow. I don't think Darius Garland is done getting better either, which is why, Spencer, I wouldn't be in the business of trading Darius Garland. If you do want to make changes, and I think changes should be made, and I have talked ad nauseum on this podcast about how I don't think the core four exists anymore. I think Jarrett Allen is a very, very fine player. He's a very high-level role player, but he is not a core player. And cores in the NBA are smaller than you realize, right? Like when we talk about, oh, well, Boston's core needed 7 years to get over the hump. Who was Boston's core? It was actually Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Because you go back to the start of that 7 years, which was a conference finals appearance against LeBron James, Kevin Love, George Hill, J.R. Smith, Kyle Korver, Jeff Green, that Cavs team. And then 7 years later, they win the title. There are 3 guys that played in that conference finals against the Cavs that were on the team that won the title. It was Jason Tatum, it was Jaylen Brown, and it was Al Horford. And Al Horford played for Oklahoma City and Philadelphia in between. Like in that stretch of 7 years, he was not on the Celtics for part of it. So the core is not actually ever 4 guys. 3 guys is a big core in the NBA. And I think that's where the Cavs are at. More often, it's 2. If it's 2, it's Donovan and Evan. But I don't think Jarrett is part of that core. So if you want to keep that core together, that's fine. But I think Jarrett is going to be the guy. If somebody gets traded, I think he should be the guy that the Cavs are more seriously looking into moving this summer.
How crazy that Kyrie was on that Celtics team back then too. That I think he was injured that season.
I think he had like some surgery and he skipped Game 7. If I recall.
But back then people thought he was going to be part of their core.
And Gordon Hayward. That was the year Gordon Hayward broke his ankle Game 1 at what was then Quicken Loans Arena.
Right. And that's the thing. Like, I'm glad you brought the Celtics up because Kobe has cited each of the last 2 years, like the Celtics as an example. And I think this year he used the Thunder as an example. And I get why he's doing that. And I get where he's saying like, it takes time. And listen, there's some proof that is true. These things don't happen overnight necessarily. But with both those examples and with other examples you could come up with, all of those teams at some point made a key decision to, okay, we got to pivot off of somebody in our core that is important and get something else in here and change the math on this roster and change the math on the fit. And the example with the Celtics is Marcus Smart was like the heart and soul of that team. And they eventually got to a point where they're like, right, we need Jason Tatum to be the heart and soul of this team, along with Jaylen Brown. We're going to pivot to those 2. So it's about deciding who your core is, and it might not be all 4 guys. And so I agree with you. That's where I think where Jarrett Allen comes into focus here. And to your point on like, is he still part of the core? I think this postseason showed like he gets played off the floor in certain series. Now he was still out there because he's an important piece of what they wanted to do. And I think Kenny was trying to just like keep his best players out there. But I think you saw like when he disappeared for long stretches in some of those games against the Pacers, that there's just certain styles that he'll work for. But when you get deeper into the playoffs, those styles that he fits with to play in, they're just not there. Like the pace of play stuff is gonna leave him more susceptible matchup wise. He's not going to be as effective. And the Pacers give you that. The Celtics would have given you some of that had they advanced. The Knicks can play with some of that. They did that a little bit against the Pacers as well. And so I question like if he's the right player to move forward and get you over that hump. And then there's also just the physical side of it where it's like, you know, Jarrett has openly talked about the fact that he doesn't necessarily love playing a physical style. He can do it, but it's not his favorite thing to do. And it's nothing against Jarrett Allen, because I think Jarrett Allen, like you said, is a great player in this league. And I think he's an awesome person. Like he's as nice and humble and candid as anybody could be. But I also just think like they need a little more of that tough mentality and that playoff mentality, and guys who are willing to do different things this time of year and help you stretch the floor. And he can't give you that. So I'm with you in the same camp of, if you're going to change the math here on this roster, I think you start with Jarrett Allen, and Darius would be like a secondary thing if a Jarrett Allen trade doesn't come to fruition. But I'm more inclined to keep Darius Garland at this point, because I think he can still play in those types of series that we saw Jarrett struggle.
So I think both of those players that you brought up, I think they impact other players too, as you talk about this roster and you talk about it moving forward. So we're going to do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. So you bring up Jarrett Allen, or I guess I bring up Jarrett Allen. You talked about him too. That'd be more accurate to say. And I'm going to be spending some time on this on tomorrow's show. You won't be here. I think you'll be busy tracking OTA completion percentage or something like that on Locked On Shedeur Sanders. I think that's how you're spending your Friday. I will be talking about Evan Mobley on Locked On Cavs. But I do think that it's not addition by subtraction if Jarrett Allen goes. Like, he's a good player. And I've not sat here and said the Cavs should trade Jarrett Allen just to get him off the roster. That's not true. If you're trading Jarrett Allen, you need to be getting better or at least staying at the same level but looking different. I do think that having Evan Mobley play more center would be a good thing too, as you talk about his development. Is that the thing that can take you to the next level? And the other way that I look at this too, and this is kind of a take I sort of soft launched on Monday's episode, but I want to get into it a little bit more here. I think if you trade Jarrett Allen, you might make some other, like maybe you trade Isaac Okoro or Dean Wade or something like that. But you don't have to make any other like significant moves. I don't think, Spencer, that you can trade Darius Garland and not trade Jarrett Allen. Like, I think if you trade Darius, if you go that far, if you make that big of a move, I think you probably need to make so many changes to your roster that you're going to need to trade Jarrett Allen too in order to accomplish.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. It's kind of like you can't have one without the other type thing. But I think if it's the opposite where you trade Jarrett, you could get players back that fit around Garland and Mitchell, obviously, as your two smaller guards, like on the outside there on the perimeter. So I agree with you. I think that's a good point. Like the math on if you trade Garland and what that means for the roster, it's a larger impact than if you trade Jarrett. And yes, like you can't just trade him to trade him. I know that like this time of year becomes, people get so lost in the trade, the NBA trade machine, right? Like, hey, what does the money line up? Can I actually make this move happen? And they just start throwing out these random assortments of trades where it's like, hey, what can we do to get Jarrett Allen off this roster and this random assortment of players on our roster just to change things up? And that's not what a trade should be about. Like, if you're Kobe Altman, you got to make a trade that would mean Jarrett's going somewhere for the value that you think he is, and that the NBA frankly thinks he is, because I know the NBA thinks he's a great player as well. And then for you, it's about like getting the things that you need. Like you have to even if you're getting like two for the price of one, like it has to be two players that you feel like change the rotations in a way where, okay, this is going to make us more competitive against a team like the Pacers or like the Celtics. That's the key thing here. And that's what makes it difficult, because it really isn't ever as easy as, hey, let's just go on the trade machine and find somebody that we can match the money with Jarrett Allen. There's always a lot more that goes into it, because, again, you're not just going to trade him to trade him. You have to get something back in return of value, and that's where these things, I think, get so convoluted and complicated. And that, honestly, like that might be the biggest reason, Danny, why we're talking about this team standing pat by the time the season rolls around next year, because they might try to shop Jarrett Allen, and then if the value just isn't there, they might decide, well, we're not going to just trade him to trade him. Guess we're running it back with the same team.
So you mean to tell me you don't think the Cavs are going to trade Donovan Mitchell for the number 1 overall pick, Cooper Flagg? I assume you saw that big trade too. That was a four-way trade that saw Jarrett Allen and Donovan Mitchell lead the Cavs, and the Cavs get Cooper Flagg back in return, which I would be pretty stunned if that were to happen. But you look at this in so many different ways. And I think you can trade Jarrett without having to trade Garland. But as I said, I think if you trade Garland, you probably have to remake the roster in so many different ways to make that happen. And I just think that is a lot of, it's a lot of work. And I guess it's very complicated work would probably be a better way to put it. And after Kobe Altman's end of season press conference this year, like there was some reading between the lines that I think we all did. And like he had the one answer where he said, we're not going to count out a 28-year-old Donovan Mitchell. We're not going to count out a 25-year-old Darius Garland. We're not going to count out a 23-year-old Evan Mobley. And they should not be counting out those guys. But he didn't mention Jarrett Allen in that answer. And it's just like, that's a thing worth reading into. And that comes on the heels of, at the very same press conference the year before, he said, I don't see why we can't run it back. And I did not take Kobe at his word then. I thought, okay, well, he's probably still going to trade somebody. probably still going to trade Jarrett Allen. That obviously didn't happen, but I think that it was kind of more about what he didn't say this year, if that makes sense.
I agree. I know we talked about that after the press conference as well. The idea that the tone was a little bit different. Now he did still so he was asked specifically about Jarrett, and he made one of his quotes was something along the lines of like, Jarrett is still important to what we do or something like that. And so he gave some credence to the idea that they still like Jarrett, but as a GM, like you got to kind of play that game, right? You can't just come out and throw a player under the bus, especially if you're trying to shop him, because you don't want to make him look invaluable to some team. You want to keep his value as high as you can, so you get the package that you're looking for in a potential trade. So he's got to balance and juggle those things and the way he says things. But you're right, like what he didn't say this year versus last year definitely stood out. I'm curious from your perspective, Danny, because yeah, like that ridiculous trade for the number 1 overall pick where you get Cooper Flagg that involved Jarrett and Donovan. Like some of these we know are just absolutely far-fetched. But as you've thought about trading Jarrett Allen, is there a concoction of players or like a player that you've had your eye on specifically? Because that is the next sort of stage of this question, right? Is like, what deal makes sense? I know there was the trade with the Lakers that somebody threw out there of like Rui Hachimura and Dalton Connect, which I kind of like, and I think the Cavs would maybe be interested in because you get a guy like Dalton Connect who's young. They talk so much about development. That was a big theme of Kobe Altman's press conference, that maybe they would like somebody like that, but I don't know if the value's there with like Rui Hachimura to make that trade either. So I guess from your perspective, what is like the ideal player that you were looking for in a return for Jarrett Allen, whether it's a trade that actually could happen or not? Like what's the player that you're looking for?
So the deal that I would want to do, and I don't know if the New Orleans Pelicans would do this, but I would want to, and I know that they have had interest in Jarrett Allen in the past. Now there is a new decision maker there in Joe Dumars. Yeah. Obviously, David Griffin no longer their president of basketball operations. So I don't know what their interest in Jarrett Allen would be, but I do believe that they have had interest in Jarrett Allen in the past. And I don't know if the Pelicans would do this, but I wonder if a deal like Jarrett Allen for Yes Messi and Herb Jones would get it done. That gets you a center that can play 15 minutes. Now he's probably at this point in his career, and he's a young player, and I like Messi. He had a really good game against the Cavs when they played in New Orleans earlier in the season. I think it was still in 2024 at that point. But I wonder if that's the sort of thing that could work. And then could you maybe trade Isaac Okoro to the Kings for Jonas Valanciunas? Like, is that a thing that you can do? Because I would feel much better about that version, and it shakes the Cavs up enough. It changes the way the money looks a little bit. And maybe it eases some other departures that you make. Like, those are the deals that I look at, because I don't think with where the Cavs are at financially, I think it's going to be really difficult to trade Jarrett Allen, who next year will be making $20 million. And if the Cavs trade Jarrett Allen, they cannot receive back in that trade more than $20 million. Exactly. Right. Not a cent more. It's really hard for me to see them getting one singular player that is as good as Jarrett Allen in that trade back. That's a really difficult thing, just because he has a very team-friendly contract, and he doesn't play a premium position. So I do wonder if splitting that up into two players is the right move.
I really like that idea as a trade. You know, you get somebody back like Herb Jones who can be a forward for you. And I know last year he only played like 20 games, but guy who in his career the year before shot over 40% from three, so he can stretch the floor for you, and that's one of the biggest things you're missing with Jarrett. So I like that idea. I know my partner over at Cavaliers on SI, Spencer Davies. I don't know if he brought this up with you at all, but a deal that I really liked that we sort of talked about was somebody like Bobby Portis. I think I like in a potential move too. Now his contract's a little different because I think he has like a team option, or he has his own option. I forget exactly the details of his contract.
I believe he has a player option.
Yeah. So I think he can opt out. But you know, that sort of intrigues me, because Portis is somebody who does things different than what Jarrett Allen brings to the table. And he also has that championship pedigree, right? Like he's won a title. So those are the types of players I think that do make sense. Herb Jones would be awesome. And you're right. They need to sort of find somebody who can play center, but maybe not the full center minutes, because the idea would be that would be Mobley, right? Like he'd play about 20 to 25 minutes a night at that spot, and then the other minutes would be occupied by somebody else. So it's figuring out how to make all that fit together. And I know they're obviously restricted by what they can do if they're a second apron team, and that comes into play here too. Like, do they not bring a couple guys back because they don't want to be a second apron team? So they got to think about all those different things. But we are definitely on the same page in that Jarrett should be the first thing you're looking at. And I think similarly, we have similar ideas of like trades that we've thought about or looked at that make some sense. And I think yours with the Pelicans makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I don't know if the Pelicans would do it. I don't know if the Cavs would do it, but I just think as I sit here and listen, it's June 4th at 10 o'clock at night as we record this. There's a long way to go before a trade will be made. This stuff will certainly pick up over the next couple of weeks as the finals get started and then wind down at some point, but it'll be a very, very interesting time. It's a very interesting summer with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Spencer, thanks so much for doing this, man. Have so much fun at organized team activities, covering the Browns for us over at Locked On Browns, tracking every single make-believe snap that Shedeur Sanders takes, man. It's got to be a blast.
Gotta get them all. Yeah, gotta get them all. So people can decide whether or not Shedeur Sanders should be the starter right now on June 4th against the third and fourth team players on the team. But we're having a blast.
Yeah, and I'm just glad I get to say Shedeur Sanders so I can tag it on YouTube and get all of that web traffic, man. Thanks so much for doing this. You can also check out Spencer over at Cleveland Cavaliers on SI. He does a ton of stuff over there, including his podcast, which you can get anywhere you get your podcast, the same place you're listening to this one. And if you're watching this one right now, do me a favor as we get out of here. Hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs. I'll be back tomorrow talking about Evan Mobley's season and where he goes from here, right here on Locked On Cavs.